You know, a lot of times when I'm in church, I'll have somebody say to me, "Preacher, we want you to step on our toes. We want you to challenge us, to really stir us up." Of course, what that really means is we want you to step on somebody else's toes. Because if we step on my toes, I'm not going to like it, and I'm going to get mad, and I might leave the church, right? Part of the minister's duty is to challenge us at times. And so I want to offer that what I say today is not to shame us, not to make us feel so terrible, but to call us to look at some things in our world and our lives today. Because it's got to be more than just talking about Jesus and how everything is fine. But how do the words of Jesus and how do the words of the Bible change our life and bring us to God's realm in this place? Martin Luther King Jr. original birth name was not Martin. Martin Luther King Jr.'s father went to Germany and heard about the Protestant Reformation and changed his name and changed Martin's name to Martin. From the very beginning, Martin Luther King Jr. was claimed really as a person of reform. His dad, who was a preacher, gave that into him. And yet, when you read Martin Luther King Jr.'s biography, there were times when he didn't want to do this. He didn't want to take this mantle. He just wanted to be a preacher. He just wanted to speak and be with people. He did not want to challenge the power brokers and the people because he knew the cost of that. And in his biography, he talks about times when he was depressed, when he struggled. He said, "God, do I need to do this?" And yet, he said yes. You know, Samuel, at 13 years old, said, "God, here am I. What do you want to do with me?" That's a powerful image, isn't it? For a 13-year-old boy to say, "God, what do you want to do with me?" Because, you know, honestly, when I was 13 years old, I wasn't thinking much about God. You know, I was thinking about girls, getting a bicycle, a lot of different things, you know. And even as I got to college, and even after college, I'm thinking about God. But, you know, that's why I entitled this sermon, "Use Me, O Lord, but not just now," right? There's this song that goes, as soon as I'm out of college, as soon as I pay my debts, as soon as I've gotten married, as soon as I've done my army stint, I want you to use me, O Lord, but not just now. How often do we say that? Use me, O Lord, but not just now. You see, part of what God is calling us to do when we say we're a Christian, when we say we follow Jesus, is that we are obedient. We follow that call. And Jesus, his whole life, his teachings were about sharing God's word with everyone and bringing those who are marginalized, those who were disenfranchised, those who were pushed outside, and not those who were in positions of power, to know that they're all there. For the people who were in power need to be advocates for those who are marginalized. You see, what happened was Martin Luther King Jr. had to speak up and give voice because nobody else would give voice for people of color in our country. It certainly wasn't all of the leaders, although LBJ certainly did significant thing as it came. But so often it was, just know your time. Can't you just hold on? Can't you just know your place a little longer? How many times has that been said to groups of people? Women, just know your place, right? Just be a little quiet in the church, you know? Gay people, you know, come on. You don't need to have equal rights. I mean, just don't push us too hard. You see, when people who are in positions of power, like those of us, a white male especially, it gets very discomforting when somebody all of a sudden challenges you to give up some of your power. I'll never forget, Diane, back in 1985, women ministers wasn't as common as the thing it is today. And there was the feminist movement. And because some of the women were a little more, burning bras and doing those type of things, a lot of the people in the church were, oh, those women there, and they kind of make blanket statements and write off the feminist movement. Now, Diane, though, as gentle as she is still a strong woman. And she was not going to let people tell her, this is your place and you need to stay there. And so she went into ministry, but it was a very difficult time. And I remember when she came home from church, the first Sunday that she preached at Garden City Christian Church on the east side, on the west side. The elder escorted her down the aisle on the way back and patted her on the elbow and said, "That was a nice little sermonette, honey." I said, "He doesn't know you, does he?" They were going to be in for a rude awakening. But actually, it was very difficult for her. Because as she was in a role, there were other women who didn't want her to be in a leadership role. Because they had done their bit as being, at home, taking care of the kids. You need to know your place too. You see, Martin Luther King Jr. wasn't about fighting for rights for just African Americans. He was about breaking down the walls that set us in place for all of us. Even white males. Because we had that image of being, a certain stereotype of who we were. When we break down those walls of stereotype, it gives us freedom for all of us to be who we need to be. Because I'm not like most guys, who are good with their hands. They're mechanical. They can build things. Diane says, "Jerry, we need a husband here who can take care of the things around the house." I said, I can choreograph the Lord's Prayer. I can write a musical, but I'm so unmechanical. There was a stereotype. If you're a man, you do these certain things. You see, Martin Luther King Jr. was about breaking those walls and those stereotypes. Now, the reality is, we've begun, but it's not even finished. And we're still even coming there. I mean, when we see these things happening in our world today, we have to come to some understanding. I think we have to admit that we still have a systematic racism in our country and in our world. When I say racism, that isn't just black people. That's anybody who's been marginalized because of race or color or sexual orientation. Racism happens out of a stereotype and a stigma. We who are in positions of power need to be those advocates. So here's an example. When Eric Garner was choked to death, if that was done by a person, a civilian, do you really think they wouldn't have been arrested? But you see, we have now where France, we had the bombing and we terrible situation over there where lives were killed, but at the same time there was a Nigerian massacre of 450 people killed. Did we hear about it? No. And we have to have this understanding, I think, at least to admit and to understand that there still is an inequality. There are 7 times more African American men in jail than Anglos. That isn't just about racism. Some of it's poverty. Some of it's because somebody doesn't have enough money, and somebody who does can get themselves off in jail. But it happens. And it's there today. The stereotypes that happen isn't just an issue about black and white, although there are many layers of that we have to unpack for ourselves. And how do we do that? We do that by listening to one another and hearing each other's story and understanding each other for who they are. When I lived in Seattle, Washington, People who were Eskimos came down from Alaska to get jobs. The stereotype and the people who were marginalized weren't African Americans, it was Eskimos. And when I worked, I had a friend who was an Eskimo. And you know what they said about this Eskimo? The other guys would say, that guy smells. That Eskimo is lazy. Those Eskimos can't be trusted. I mean, it was everything that as I grew up, my friends said about African Americans. The stereotype was set in motion because it's almost like we have to have somebody that we're better than. You know, it's been difficult through this period of generations because certainly there were people who've not done it well when they fought for rights. There's been violence done. And, you know, there's never a justification for violence. I think that was the powerful thing about Martin Luther King Jr. was that he wanted to change things by non-violent ways. Gandhi was a great respecter of Martin Luther King Jr. because of his working for non-violence, but for being a change. Not to say, I can't do it. God, I want you to use me, but I want to do it in a way of love. That's a much harder way than a way of violence. You know, in our world, we are so prone to make violence. And after 9/11, we've been so fearful and we've been set so much that it's given permission. In fact, I think for some of our people in power to take away more rights because it's easy. We have to do this because we never want a 9/11 again. And that's right, we don't. But my friends, if we don't speak up for one another, if we don't speak up for those who are marginalized, then what are we about as Christians? You know, when I was at the city council and I did a prayer for the city council here, and you know that I've been in dialogue trying to get meeting with the Muslim community and the Jewish community. And one of the guys from the Muslim community, who's a trustee, was asked to do the prayer at the city council. And so I was talking to a couple of the people in the city council saying, you know, are there people here who would be supportive of the Muslim community in Carmel? And he said, oh, I think so. And then he called me back about 7 hours and said, Jerry, the ones that I thought were, I don't think. In fact, this one guy in the city council said, if he prays in the name of Allah, I'm walking out. Well, I thought, you know what? I better go with my friend as he prays at the city council meeting. So now by this time, they've all heard that there's a Muslim coming to the city council of Carmel, and he's going to pray. Now you can imagine how tense that got. So I meet my friend, Ashir, and we come up, and two of the city council members come right down. I say, I'm here, you know. And Ashir was glad that I was there because you can imagine how scary that was for him. And it made me aware how scared people are. You see, when we've done everything in the media paints people, and they talk about terrorists who are terrorists, but they aren't just terrorists, they're Islamic terrorists, then it makes everybody think all people who are of Islam are like those terrorists. And we know that's not true. But fear plays into our minds, and it's very easy to respond out of fear than out of love. How will we say, God, use me? And how can we say, here I am, Lord, and let me be a voice? You see, it is the people who are in positions of power who have to be an advocate for the least of these. Isn't that what Jesus said? I mean, isn't that what he said? The least of these. The last shall be first, and the first shall be last. And that we will be judged by how we care for those who've been marginalized, for those who've been set outside. And I know it's hard. I mean, I know it's hard. We've been brought up a certain way. We've been brought up with certain teachings and certain values, and then we've been challenged by them. And then we say, no, but what happens? We let them vote, then what happens? And then we do this. I remember somebody saying, you let gay people get married, then what's going to happen? You're going to have somebody get married to a dog. And I said, come on, really? I mean, you know, you just jump from here to all the way here, where two people, consenting adults, want to have a sense of relationship with one another. You see, that's what Martin Luther King Jr. was fighting for. That's what he put on his life on the line. And that journey is not over. And so for us to, you know, put our heads in the sand and just say, Jesus, we love you and we're just going to be fine right here, doesn't work. Because Jesus called us to be a transforming agent in the world. Jesus called us to do our part. And we can't change the world all over, but we can do our part right here. Our part right here. So when somebody who's been pushed off and aside will know that there's a place for them, and that God loves them, and doesn't just love them, but allows them to be who they are. I give thanks for the prophets of our day. For Samuel, who said yes to God. For Martin Luther King Jr., who said yes to God. For others of our time today, and may we be the prophets to call God's kingdom into our reality.